The air was thick with the stench of fear and exhaust fumes. A group of 4 friends, their laughter echoing in the desolate streets, made their way through the urban maze. There was Mark, the level-headed leader, always ready with a plan. Beside him walked Jessica, her quick wit as sharp as the switchblade she carried. Little did they know their friendship was about to be tested in the most gruesome ways imaginable. They had been celebrating Tommy's birthday, a night of carefree revelry in a downtown bar. The news, when it finally reached them, came as a chaotic whisper, a chilling tale of madness spreading like wildfire. Their laughter died in their throats, replaced by a suffocating silence as they stared at each other, the weight of the situation crashing down on them. The glass doors slid shut behind them, the electronic hiss of the automatic mechanism a jarring contrast to the guttural growls echoing from the other side. They had made it, for now. The store was eerily quiet, the only sound the frantic pounding of their hearts and the rasping of their breaths. Mark, ever the pragmatist, took charge, his voice a low growl that betrayed his own fear. "We need to secure this place," he said, his eyes scanning the layout of the store. "Tommy, Emily, start barricading the doors. Jessica, with me." They moved with a practiced synchronicity, their years of friendship forging a bond that transcended their terror. As darkness fell, they huddled together in the center of the store, surrounded by a makeshift fortress of shopping carts, canned goods, and anything else they could find to hold back the tide of the undead. The silence was broken only by the eerie crackling of the fluorescent lights overhead and the occasional thump against the boarded-up windows. The grocery store, their sanctuary, was slowly becoming their tomb. The minutes stretched into hours, each tick of the clock a hammer blow to their sanity. They were trapped, hunted, their worst nightmares come to life. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile, almost surreal glow over the aisles of canned goods, cereal boxes, and cleaning supplies. The air, thick with the smell of bleach and stale bread, did little to mask the metallic tang of fear that permeated the makeshift fortress. Mark, ever the leader, paced back and forth, his boots thudding softly against the linoleum floor. He checked and rechecked their meager defenses. Shopping carts piled high with canned goods, broomsticks wedged against the handles of the sliding glass doors, a flimsy wall of potato chips and cookies stacked precariously against the windows. "We need a plan," Jessica muttered, her voice barely a whisper above the rustling of snack food bags as she reinforced their barricade. Her fingers, usually so nimble as she picked pockets and hot-wired cars, fumbled with the cheap plastic. Tommy and Emily sat huddled together, their backs pressed against a tower of toilet paper, their faces pale and drawn in the flickering candlelight. Tommy, usually the life of the party, was unusually quiet, his eyes darting nervously around their makeshift prison. Emily, her usual bubbly personality subdued, clutched a can of soup in one hand, her knuckles white with tension. "We need to take shifts," Mark announced, his voice firm despite the tremor that ran through him. "Someone needs to stay awake, keep watch, just in case." He didn't need to elaborate on what just in case meant. They all knew the stakes. They had seen what happened to those who weren't fast enough, strong enough, lucky enough to escape the ravenous hunger of the undead. They drew straws, a childish game with life or death consequences. Tommy, his face ashen, drew the short straw. He took his position by the boarded-up windows, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the cracks, his hand clutching a rusty pipe wrench he had found discarded in the back aisle. The hours crawled by, each one an eternity. The silence inside the store was broken only by the rhythmic thumping of their hearts, the occasional creak of the building settling, and the ever-present symphony of moans from beyond their fragile sanctuary. The air grew thick with tension, punctuated by the rustling of snack bags as they nervously nibbled on their dwindling supplies. Dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of grey and sickly yellow. The moans outside seemed to lessen, the undead creatures retreating from the weak sunlight like cockroaches scurrying for cover. A collective sigh of relief swept through the small group, the tension that had held them captive for the past hours easing slightly. "Maybe we can make a run for it," Emily suggested, a glimmer of hope flickering in her tired eyes. While they're occupied. She couldn't bring herself to say the word dormant. It seemed too final, too accepting of the horrifying reality they were now living in. Mark considered this, weighing their options. They were low on supplies, and the longer they stayed in the grocery store, the more likely it was that the undead would figure out a way in. "We need more information," Mark said finally, his voice firm. "We need to know what's out there, how many of them there are, if there's any safe way out of the city." The radio crackled to life, spitting out a torrent of static and garbled voices. Jessica fiddled with the dial, her brow furrowed in concentration, her fingers moving with practiced ease despite the tremor that ran through her. "Come in. This is anyone. Please," a voice, frantic and desperate, cut through the static. "We need help. Overrun." The voice dissolved into a flurry of incoherent screams cut short by an ominous crunching sound, then silence. Jessica lowered the radio, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and despair. Mark, ever the pragmatist, broke the heavy silence. "We can't stay here," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor that ran through him. "We'll be sitting ducks. We need to find a way out of the city, somewhere safer." "Safer?" Jessica scoffed, her voice laced with bitter irony. "Where the hell is safer in a world overrun by flesh-eating monsters?" "There has to be somewhere," Emily insisted, her voice small but firm. "What about that army base, the one a few miles out of town? Don't they have, like, protocols for this kind of thing?" Mark nodded slowly. "It's a long shot," he conceded, "but it's our best shot." "All right, here's the plan," Mark said, his voice low and urgent. They would use whatever they could find in the grocery store to create a diversion, a noisy, chaotic spectacle to lure the undead away from the front of the building. While the creatures were distracted, they would make their escape out the back, slipping through the loading dock and into the alleyways beyond. It was a risky plan, fraught with danger at every turn, but it was their only hope. They gathered their meager supplies, cans of food to throw, bottles of cleaning products to create a slippery barrier, anything that could buy them precious seconds of distraction. Tommy, his initial fear replaced by a grim determination, volunteered to create the diversion. The moment of truth arrived. Tommy took a deep breath and hurled a can of peaches against the boarded-up windows. The sound, amplified by the silence of the deserted street, echoed like a gunshot. He followed it with another can, then another, the clattering metal a jarring counterpoint to the guttural moans that rose from the street outside. As if on cue, a section of the barricade near the loading dock gave way, the flimsy wall of potato chips and cookies crumbling under the relentless pressure of the undead. "Go, go, go!" Mark roared, shoving Jessica and Emily towards the back exit. He grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and unleashed a cloud of white foam, momentarily blinding the creatures that were now swarming towards them. the air filled with the stench of decay and the sound of snarling, gnashing teeth. The back exit was a churning sea of rotting flesh. Dozens of them, drawn by the cacophony of Tommy's distraction, pressed against the emergency exits, their moans a symphony of hunger. They clawed and slammed against the reinforced glass, their eyes burning with a terrifying, vacant hunger. Tommy, his face pale with exertion, continued his barrage of cans and bottles, his heart hammering against his ribs. Each clang, each smash was a prayer against the inevitable, a desperate plea for a miracle that he knew deep down wouldn't come. Mark, his eyes scanning their desperate situation, knew they were out of time. The loading dock was too narrow, the alleyway beyond too exposed. They would be easy targets, picked off one by one as they tried to outrun the relentless horde. "Tommy, fall back!" Mark roared, his voice barely audible above the cacophony. Tommy, his chest heaving, abandoned his post and sprinted towards his friends, his lungs burning, his legs heavy with exhaustion. He could feel the hot breath of the undead on his neck, their grasping hands reaching for him, their ragged nails scraping against the back of his jacket. He didn't dare look back. They retreated back into the labyrinthine aisles of the grocery store, their pursuers hot on their heels. Mark, his mind racing, grabbed a can of lighter fluid from a nearby shelf and doused the floor, creating a makeshift barrier of flammable liquid. "Jessica, fire!" he yelled, tossing her his lighter. The flames roared to life, a wall of fire that momentarily held the undead at bay. The creatures recoiled from the heat, their moans transforming into hisses and shrieks of pain. The air filled with the acrid stench of burning flesh, a grim testament to their desperation. But the reprieve was short-lived. The undead, driven by their insatiable hunger, pushed through the flames, their charred flesh smoking, their eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. "We need another way out," Emily screamed, her voice cracking with terror. She pointed to a ventilation shaft high up on the wall, its metal grate partially dislodged. "Maybe we can fit through there." Mark, his eyes scanning the shaft, knew it was a long shot. "Emily, you first," he ordered, his voice tight with urgency. Section 4. The Price of Survival. As Emily scrambled up towards the shaft, her heart pounding in her chest, she could hear the snarls of the undead drawing closer. She risked a glance back and saw that Tommy was no longer with them. He was standing near the back exit, his back against the wall, his eyes wide with fear, a rusty pipe wrench clutched tightly in his hand. He was buying them time, sacrificing himself so they could escape. "Tommy, no!" she screamed, her voice lost in the cacophony of snarls and moans. But Tommy didn't move. He stood there, a lone figure silhouetted against the flickering flames, a look of grim determination etched on his young face. He raised the pipe wrench above his head, a silent challenge to the approaching horde. Emily wanted to scream, to cry out for him, but no sound escaped her lips. She could only watch in horrified silence as the undead swarmed over him, their bodies a writhing, gnashing mass of decay and hunger. His screams, when they came, were short-lived, swallowed by the relentless growls of the undead. Section 5. A moment of respite. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she pulled herself up into the ventilation shaft, the metal grating clanging shut behind her. The air was thick with dust and the stench of stale grease, but it was a sanctuary, a temporary reprieve from the nightmare unfolding below. She could hear Jessica scrambling up behind her, her breath ragged, her voice choked with sobs. They huddled together in the darkness, their bodies shaking with fear and exhaustion, the echoes of Tommy's screams ringing in their ears. For now, they were safe. but they knew it was only a matter of time before the undead found a way into the ventilation system, before the nightmare began again. They were trapped, hunted, their world reduced to the narrow confines of a metal coffin, and the worst was yet to come. The air hung heavy and still in the ventilation shaft, thick with dust, the metallic tang of rust, and the lingering scent of rancid grease. It clung to Emily and Jessica like a shroud, a suffocating reminder of their confinement. The darkness, absolute and impenetrable, pressed in on them, amplifying every rustle of cloth, every panicked breath. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs, each thump a deafening echo in the confined space. She felt Jessica's trembling hand clutch at her own, their fingers intertwining in a desperate pact of solidarity. The ventilation fan, dormant for who knows how long, hung just above them, its rusted blades a silent menace in the darkness. The shaft itself was barely wide enough for them to crawl through, forcing them into an uncomfortable embrace. The rough metal dug into Emily's knees, sending sharp jabs of pain through her already aching body. She dared not cry out, afraid to break the fragile silence that held the darkness at bay. Every creak of the building, every groan of settling metal sent a jolt of fear through her. The memory of Tommy's screams, the sickening crunch of bone against teeth, echoed in the silence, a constant reminder of the fate that awaited them should they fail. She squeezed Jessica's hand tighter, drawing strength from their shared terror. "We can't stay here," Jessica's voice, a strained whisper, cut through the suffocating silence. "We need to keep moving, find a way out of this death trap." Despite the tremor in her voice, there was a steely resolve in her tone, a refusal to succumb to despair. Emily nodded, grateful for Jessica's pragmatism. They couldn't afford to give in to fear, to let the darkness consume them. They had to keep moving, keep fighting for every precious breath. They owed it to themselves and to Tommy's memory. "Do you see anything?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible above the pounding of her own heart. Jessica, her eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness, scanned their surroundings. "There," she whispered, pointing to a faint glimmer of light far ahead. "I think I see an opening, maybe another vent." Hope, fragile but insistent, flickered within Emily. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. They had to take it. They inched forward, their bodies scraping against the rough metal, their progress agonizingly slow. The air grew colder, carrying with it the faint scent of fresh air, a tantalizing promise of freedom. The further they crawled, the narrower the shaft became, squeezing them tighter, stealing their breath. Panic welled up in Emily's chest, threatening to overwhelm her. The darkness seemed to press down on her, suffocating her, amplifying every claustrophobic fear that gnawed at the edges of her sanity. "Jessica," she gasped, her voice tight with panic. I can't breathe." Jessica, ever the pragmatist, recognized the signs of a panic attack. "Emily, listen to me," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor that ran through her. "We're almost there, just a little further. Focus on my voice, on my breathing." She took a deep, steadying breath, willing herself to stay calm, to be the anchor Emily so desperately needed. Emily, clinging to Jessica's words like a lifeline, tried to match her breathing, to slow the frantic pounding of her heart. The darkness seemed to recede slightly, the walls of the shaft no longer pressing in on her with suffocating intensity. She focused on the faint glimmer of light ahead, willing it to grow larger, to guide them out of the suffocating darkness. They inched forward, their progress agonizingly slow, their bodies screaming in protest. The air grew heavier, the scent of fresh air replaced by a cloying metallic odor that sent chills down Emily's spine. It smelled of blood, of decay, of death. "Jessica, do you smell that?" Emily whispered. her voice tight with dread. "What is that smell?" Jessica, her heart sinking, recognized the smell all too well. It was the stench of the undead, the unmistakable aroma of rotting flesh and decay. It clung to the air like a curse, a harbinger of their doom. "We need to hurry," she urged, her voice barely a whisper. "They're close." They pushed forward, their limbs heavy with exhaustion, their movements fueled by adrenaline and a primal fear that gnawed at their sanity. The glimmer of light ahead, once a beacon of hope, now seemed like a cruel illusion, a trick of the light designed to lure them deeper into the heart of darkness. The sound, when it came, was low at first, a guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. Then it grew louder, closer, resolving itself into a chorus of snarls and moans. The undead. They had found them. "Go, Emily, go!" Jessica screamed, her voice cracking with terror. "Don't look back. I'll hold them off." Emily, her mind rebelling against the thought of leaving Jessica behind, hesitated, torn between loyalty and self-preservation. "Go!" Jessica roared, shoving Emily towards the light. "Don't let my death be in vain." Emily, her eyes blurred with tears, scrambled towards the opening, her heart breaking with every inch that separated her from her friend. She didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see what awaited Jessica in the darkness. The snarls grew louder, closer, punctuated by the sickening thud of flesh against metal. Then, silence. A silence more terrifying than any scream. Emily, her body racked with sobs, stumbled out of the ventilation shaft and into the cold, unforgiving night. She was alone. The night air, cold and damp, hit Emily like a slap in the face. The deserted city reeked of smoke and decay. The moon cast an eerie glow on the ruined buildings. Broken windows gaped like empty eye sockets. Shadows danced in the flickering light of a distant fire. Emily stumbled through the deserted street. The silence was unnerving, amplifying every sound. It was the silence of a graveyard. She had no destination in mind. She had to keep moving away from the grocery store. Their faces haunted her thoughts. Memories fueled her flight, urging her onward. A flicker of light caught Emily's eye. It came from a building with a faded neon sign, Hotel Royale. The sign flickered, casting a ghostly glow. Hope surged within her. Maybe she could find shelter there. Cautiously, she crossed the street, her hand near the switchblade. The building was ravaged by chaos. Windows boarded, doors barricaded, the air heavy with decay and smoke. Emily tried the doorknob. It was locked. She tried again, but it wouldn't budge. Bloodstains spattered across the door. They were fresh, sending a chill down her spine. Whatever happened here wasn't pretty. Disappointment washed over her. She had allowed herself a flicker of hope. The city was now a graveyard. No sanctuary, no escape from the horrors. A low growl sent a jolt of adrenaline through Emily's veins. It came from the alleyway behind the hotel. They were close, too close. She turned and fled, her legs pumping. The growls behind her grew louder, urging her onward. She had no plan, only the thought to escape. The city seemed like a labyrinth, leading her further from safety. Every shadow held a threat, every corner a potential ambush. She was prey, and they were the hunters. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps, her legs screaming for respite. She had been running for what felt like hours, but her pursuers were relentless, their growls echoing behind her, urging her onward. The city, once a place of refuge, now felt like a prison, its walls closing in on her, squeezing the life out of her. She rounded a corner, her heart sinking as she realized she had stumbled into a dead end. A tall brick wall blocked her path, its surface slick with moisture and the remnants of faded graffiti. There was nowhere left to run, No escape from the horrors that were closing in on her. Turning to face her pursuers, Emily drew her switchblade, the cold metal reassuringly solid in her trembling hand. There were perhaps a dozen of them now, their bodies a grotesque tapestry of decay and violence. Their eyes, glowing with a terrifying hunger, bored into her, their moans a symphony of anticipation. The sight of them, so close, so real, sent a wave of nausea through her. But beneath the fear, a strange sense of calm settled over her. She had evaded them for as long as she could, had outrun them, outmaneuvered them. Now there was nowhere left to run, no hope of escape. All that remained was the fight. Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself for the onslaught. She knew she couldn't win, but she would make them pay for every inch. She would fight with every ounce of strength. She would not die cowering in fear. The first creature lunged, its decaying jaws snapping. Emily ducked and rammed the switchblade upwards. The creature let out a gurgling scream and stumbled back, but there were more of them, too many to fight off. They swarmed over her, a writhing mass of decay and hunger. She lashed out, but for everyone she brought down, two more took its place. She was knocked to the ground, the taste of blood filling her mouth. Clawing her way back to her feet, she stumbled against the wall, her strength fading. She closed her eyes. It was over. There was no escape, no miracle rescue. She had fought bravely, but it hadn't been enough. The city had claimed her, just as it had claimed her friends, and as the darkness closed in, Emily found a strange sense of peace. She was no longer afraid. She was empty, drained of all emotion, all hope. She was just another ghost in a city of ghosts. The world shrunk to the pinpoint focus of the switchblade clutched in Emily's hand. The cold steel, slick with blood, was the only thing separating her from oblivion. Each shallow breath felt like a victory snatched from defeat. The stench of decay clung to the back of her throat. The alleyway was now a tomb illuminated by the pale moonlight. Shadows stretched and twisted, eager to witness her demise. She could feel the cold, damp brick pressing against her back. There was no escape, no hope of rescue. This was where it ended. The moans of the undead, once a distant threat, now pressed in on her, a cacophony of hunger that reverberated through her very bones. They were so close now, their putrid breath hot on her skin, their grasping hands reaching for her, eager to tear, to rend, to devour. She could almost feel their cold, dead flesh against her own, could almost taste the metallic tang of her own mortality on their tongues. Emily closed her eyes, shutting out the sight of their decaying forms, the grotesque tableau of their hunger. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear, of witnessing her final moments of terror. Instead, she focused on the sound of their moans, the symphony of the damned that played out around her. It was a chilling melody, a dirge for a world consumed by madness, a requiem for a humanity lost to its baser instincts. There was a strange beauty in their hunger, a primal simplicity that mocked the complexities of the world she was leaving behind. They wanted only to feed, to consume, to perpetuate their own existence. There was no malice in their actions, no cruelty, only the relentless drive to survive, a drive that had been stripped of all pretense, all higher purpose. And in that moment, as the darkness threatened to engulf her, Emily understood. She understood the hunger that drove them, the primal need that consumed their every thought, their every action, for she too felt the gnawing emptiness within her, the void left by the loss of her friends, the shattering of her world. It was a different kind of hunger, a hunger for companionship, for love, for a return to a time when the world made sense. But it was a hunger nonetheless, a primal need that could never be fully sated, a constant ache in the depths of her being. They were all just creatures, she realized, driven by their needs, their desires, their fears. The line between human and monster, once so clear, now seemed blurred, almost non-existent. They were all just survivors, clinging to existence in a world that had lost its way. A world where the rules no longer applied, where the only law was survival of the fittest. The first touch came as a surprise, a cold, clammy hand brushing against her arm. She flinched, her instincts screaming at her to fight, to flee, to do anything but stand passively and await her fate. But the strength had drained from her limbs, leaving her feeling hollow, an empty vessel awaiting the inevitable. The moans grew louder, closer, a chorus of anticipation that heralded her end. Emily closed her eyes, surrendering to the darkness that threatened to consume her. This was it. There would be no last words, no heroic final stand, no miraculous escape, just the cold, hard reality of death, the finality of it all. And as the darkness closed in, swallowing her whole, Emily found a strange sense of peace. She was no longer alone. She was surrounded by her own kind, creatures driven by the same primal urges, the same desperate need to survive. In that final moment of clarity, she realized that death was not the end. It was merely a transformation, a passage from one state of being to another. In a world consumed by darkness, sometimes the only solace is found in the embrace of the void.